and then we can get started. So this name of this sutta is called the Kesaputtiya Sutta. Now, this sutta is actually extremely, or I should say at least one paragraph of this sutta is extremely famous among Western Buddhists. It's something that is very often quoted, and almost every time it's quoted, it's misquoted or horribly translated to mean things that it doesn't really mean in the suttas. But so I chose this sutta today so that we can go over this and see what it really says. And also because it is an extremely beneficial sutta. They're not too far off the mark as to using this paragraph from the sutta in general as something that is very important. But it's important to understand a little bit closer to the truth of what the sutta means. So this is often called the Kalama Sutta. That name might ring a bell. If it doesn't, the paragraph that we're going to go over, that you might recognize this paragraph. So, the way the suttas work, for those of you who are not familiar, usually it starts off with a little bit of the story of the background. The Buddha was staying at this place. These are the people who came to talk to the Buddha. This is what the Buddha said. And then there's an ending, a conclusion, something, and then something happens at the end, and then that's the end of the sutta. So on one occasion, the Blessed One was wandering on a tour among the Kosalans, together with a large sangha of monks, when he reached the town of the Kalamas, named Kesaputtiya. And so, as a little bit of a background, for 40 years the Buddha wandered central and northern India, going from place to place, teaching the Dhamma. People would come and ask him questions and debate with him, and all these kind of things. So this is the Buddha wandering and going to this town of the Kalamas. And so the Kalamas of Kesaputtiya heard. It is said that the ascetic Gautama, the son of the Sakyans, who went forth from a Sakyan family, has arrived in Kesaputtiya. Now a good report that about that Master Gautama has been circulated. That the Blessed One is an Arahant, an awakened being, perfectly enlightened. And it goes through, actually it ellipses here. So it doesn't read the whole thing, but it's essentially the qualities of the Buddha. The perfectly enlightened one, teacher of gods and men, tamer of those able to be tamed, etc., etc. If you have any understanding of the qualities of the Buddha, then you've heard that before. And reveals a spiritual life that is perfectly complete and pure. Now it is good to see such arahants. Then the Kalamas of Kesaputtiya approached the Blessed One. Some paid homage to the Blessed One and sat down to one side. And then it explains, depending on how much reverence or how much respect they had for the Buddha, they do different things. Like some come and bow, some people just say, yeah, this is my name, and then they sit down, etc. It's not that much of an important thing. Some kept silent and sat down to one side. Sitting to one side, the Kalamas said to the Blessed One, Bhante. Bhante means venerable sir. It's a term that people use to this day, just as a basic word of respect when they're talking to monks. So you can call a monk Bhante. There are some ascetics and Brahmins who come to Kesaputtiya. They explain and elucidate their own doctrines, but disparage denigrate, deride, and denounce the doctrines of others. But then some other ascetics and Brahmins come to Kesaputtiya, and they too explain, elucidate their own doctrines, but disparage, denigrate, deride, and denounce the doctrines of others. We are perplexed and in doubt, Bhante, as to which of these good ascetics speaks the truth and which speaks falsehood. Now, to explain this section here real quick, we often kind of think that, everybody back then, 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, however, like our ancient, ancestors, that they somehow didn't have the amount of views that we have. That everybody all believed in whatever the dominant religion of the time was. And that is far from the case. Human nature has always been human nature. And at this time in India, and indeed from what I'm told even today, there's various gurus and teachers and people, and they wander around and they teach various different views. And so the world of the Buddha, the world that the Buddha was teaching in, was a place and a time where there was people who taught a nihilism or materialism, i.e. there's nothing after, everything can be explained by the natural world and there's nothing after death. There's people that, talked about eternal heavens and, not everybody at the time believed in rebirth. There wasn't a, thing that this is the only way it was. There's, as a matter of fact, in another sutta, the Buddha talks about there's 62 views. And throughout the suttas, thousands of pages of the suttas, that we have the Buddha and other monks kind of getting into little back and forths with, other groups, talking about their views and stuff like that. People coming to refute the Buddha and things like that. It's quite interesting, actually. But that's just to give some background. So, we have all these people coming and saying, what I'm saying is right. Everybody else is wrong. And so the people of Kesaputtiya are confused. Like, well, who do we believe? Who's right? And so they ask the Buddha. So here's they say, well, we're kind of confused. This guy has a good reputation. Let's ask him and see what he says. And so the Buddha says this. And this is the famous paragraph that's often misquoted. It is fitting for you to be perplexed, Kalamas. Fitting for you to be in doubt. Doubt has arisen in you about a perplexing matter. Come, Kalamas, do not go by oral tradition, by lineage of teaching, by hearsay, by a collection of scriptures, by logical reasoning, by inferential reasoning, by reasoning or by reasoned cognition, by the acceptance of a view after pondering it, by the seeming competence of a speaker, or because you think this ascetic is our guru, teacher. But when, Kalamas, you know for yourselves, these things are unwholesome or unskillful. These things are blameworthy. These things are censured by the wise. These things, if accepted and undertaken, lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. So this is very fascinating, very amazing, this paragraph. What is the Buddha saying? We'll go through here a little bit more in detail. Don't go by oral tradition. So that's saying, at the time of the Vedas are the backbone of modern Hinduism, right? The Brahmanical tradition back then. These were ancient texts that were orally transmitted, just like the texts of the teachings of the Buddha were orally transmitted for the first 500 years. And indeed, even today, almost 3,000 years later, there are people who memorize the whole of all the teachings, like thousands and thousands of pages, just like there's people who still memorize the Vedas in Hinduism. So This is saying, just because there's a tradition of this teaching, don't just go by that. Don't go by because there's a lineage, and it says this is what the teaching said. Just don't go just by that either. Don't go by hearsay. Well, this person says this, so maybe that's right. By a collection of scriptures. So just like oral tradition, something that's written down. By logical reasoning. So this is the interesting thing. The reason why I say this paragraph is misquoted is because it's often quoted as, at the end, instead of what I read to you, it says, if something equates with your own reasoning, then go with it. Right? That's how misquoted this quote is. But the Buddha is saying, don't even trust your own logic and your own reasoning. By inferential reasoning. By reasoned cognition. So this is all different ways you can logically reason and think about something. Don't go by acceptance of a view after pondering, thinking about it. By seeming competence of a speaker. Just because somebody can speak really well doesn't mean that you should just blindly trust them. Or because you think this ascetic is our guru. Same thing. Just because you have somebody's a teacher doesn't mean you should blindly trust them. And that's, in Buddhism itself, that's often a very good way to know. Every good teacher, every good monk that I've ever listened to, they'll say, don't just believe me because I say this. Put it into practice. Try it yourself. The Buddha himself also said this. So, but when you know for yourselves, so he's talking about experience. He's talking about, in your experience, you see that doing this is unskillful. Unskillful means that it's going to lead to my harm or to the harm of others. Blameworthy means that if I do this, people will blame me. People will, it's something that is not a good thing. And that are censured by the wise. There are people that you trust. People that you know to be good people. These are wise people. In Buddhism, and especially in Theravada tradition, we have what's called a Kalyanamitta. It's a wise spiritual friend. The Buddha said that he is the greatest Kalyanamitta. And indeed, he is, in my tradition, he is the only teacher. Everybody else, like I have a monastic who ordained me, and I get, by normal terms, you could probably say, okay, he's my teacher, but he doesn't accept being called a teacher because the Buddha is the teacher. And indeed, in my tradition, we are very closely linked to following the suttas. And some traditions are not so linked to following the suttas and do things different ways. But this is explaining where I'm coming from on this as I'm talking here. So you understand, these actions lead to my affliction. They harm myself and they harm others. So the Buddha continues. And you notice that the great thing about the Buddha, if you read the suttas, he never tells people what they should believe. He never says, you should do this. He says, well, what about this? What do you think about this? He kind of skillfully leads people to really finding their own answers, which is a fascinating thing. So we'll continue. What do you think, Kalamas, when greed arises in a person? When we talk about, when you hear greed in the suttas, what they're talking about is attachment, craving, clinging, you know, running after sensual pleasures, being enmeshed in sensual pleasures, being covetous, greedy. This is all that from a basis of craving and clinging. When greed arises in a person, is it for his welfare or for his harm? For his harm, Bhante. Kalamas, a greedy person, overcome by greed, with mind obsessed by it, destroys life, takes what is not given, transgresses with another's wife, and speaks falsehood, and he encourages others to do likewise. So this is the 4 of the 5 precepts that a Buddhist practitioner follows. Right? Not to harm other beings, not to steal, not to lie, not to sexual misconduct. Now, the 5th one that's not mentioned here is also to abstain from intoxicants that cloud the mind. And again, these are not commandments. The Buddhist never said you should do this. The Buddha said if you'd like to follow this path, these are the things that you can use as training tools. So, he says, a person whose mind is obsessed with greed does these things. And then he asks, if you do these, will that lead to his harm and suffering for a long time? And they say, yes, Bhante. So the Buddha continues, what do you think, Kalamas, when hatred arises in a person? Is it for his welfare or for his harm? For his harm, Bhante. Kalamas, a person who is full of hate, overcome by hatred, with mind obsessed by it, destroys life, etc., etc. Going through what we just did. And he encourages others to do likewise. Will that lead to his harm and suffering for a long time? Yes, Bhante. What do you think, Kalamas, when delusion arises in a person? Is it for his welfare or for his harm? And so he's going through greed, hatred, and delusion. Some of you who know a little bit of the basics of Buddhist doctrine, you might know those as the 3 poisons or the 3 roots of craving. All beings have greed, hatred, and delusion. And unless we're being very mindful, the far majority of all of our actions by body, speech, and mind actually stem from greed, hatred, or delusion. And indeed, the definition that the Buddha gives of nibbana, awakening, enlightenment, is the abandoning, the eradication of greed, hatred, and delusion in your mind. Where an awakened being has totally abandoned that. There's no more greed, there's no more attachment, there's no more aversion in an awakened being's mind. So this is, when you hear greed, hatred, and delusion, he's talking about the 3 roots of craving. And delusion, of course, delusion is the fact that we don't see things clearly because of our ignorance. We don't see things clearly because the biggest thing that we don't see clearly, the biggest delusion, is that we have a permanent self, that we are a permanent abiding self. That's the biggest delusion. The other delusion we have is that we have expectations about the world. We expect the world to give us certain things. We expect things to happen in certain ways. And when that doesn't happen, we suffer. Suffering is asking from the world what it can't give you. So this is all this delusion. And so, when delusion arises for a person, is it for his welfare or is it for his harm? For his harm, Bhante. Kalamas, a person who is deluded, overcome by delusion, with mind obsessed by it, destroys life, takes what is not given, does not speak the truth, etc., and encourages others to do likewise. Will that lead to his harm and suffering for a long time? Yes, Bhante. What do you think, Kalamas? Are these things wholesome or unwholesome? When you see wholesome and unwholesome, you could also think skillful or unskillful. It's the same word. The Pali word is kusala for skillful or wholesome, akusala for unskillful, unwholesome. So if different teachers and different translations will use those two different words. So if you see, they're both the same word, they both mean the same thing. So are these things wholesome or unwholesome? Unwholesome, Bhante. Blameworthy or blameless? Blameworthy, Bhante. Censured or praised by the wise? Censured by the wise, Bhante. Accepted and undertaken, do they lead to harm and suffering or not? Or how do you take it? Accepted and undertaken, these things lead to harm and suffering, so we take it. Thus, Kalamas, when we said, "Come, Kalamas, do not go by oral tradition," etc., 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 going through the whole, line that we did before. But when you know for yourselves, these things are unwholesome, these things are blameworthy, these things are censured by the wise, these things, if undertaken in practice, lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. It is because of this that this was said. And so he goes again. Come, Kalamas, do not go by oral tradition, by lineage of teaching, by hearsay, by a collection of scriptures, by logical reasoning, by inferential reasoning, by reasoned cognition, by the acceptance of a view after pondering it, by the seeming competence of a speaker, or because you think this ascetic is our guru. But when you know for yourselves, these things are skillful, these things are blameless, these things are praised by the wise, these things, if accepted and undertaken, lead to welfare and happiness, then you should live in accordance with them. What do you think, Kalamas, when non-greed arises in a person? Is it for his welfare or for his harm? So what do they mean by non-greed? They mean letting go, generosity, giving, these things. Truly giving and truly being generous is truly letting go. You're letting go without any expectation of reward or of getting anything back. That's truly letting go. So when you hear non-greed, that's what they're talking about. And so, when non-greed arises, is it for the welfare or for the harm? For his welfare, Bhante. Kalamas, a person without greed, not overcome by greed, his mind not obsessed by it, does not destroy life, does not take what is not given, does not transgress with another's wife, or speak falsehood, nor does he encourage others to do likewise. Will that lead to his welfare and happiness for a long time? Yes, Bhante. What do you think, Kalamas? When non-hatred arises in a person, is it for his welfare or for his harm? So what is non-hatred? Non-hatred is metta, limitless goodwill. So instead of ill will, you have goodwill. So, when non-hatred arises in a person, is it for his welfare or for his harm? For his welfare, Bhante. Kalamas, a person who is without hate, not overcome by hatred, his mind not obsessed by it, does not destroy life, etc., etc., nor does he encourage others to do likewise. Will that lead to his welfare and happiness for a long time? Yes, Bhante. What do you think, Kalamas, when non-delusion arises in a person? Is it for his welfare or for his harm? For his welfare, Bhante. Kalamas, a person who is undiluted, and an undiluted person is a person who sees things as they truly are, a person who sees with wisdom, with insight. very important. In Buddhist tradition, the Buddha taught that a person who sees with wisdom understands the Four Noble Truths, sees things as they truly are, as three things. All conditioned things have three characteristics. They are impermanent. Impermanent means ever-changing, unstable, not able to be grasped. So these things, the fact that everything in life, from the smallest particles to the universe itself, is ever-changing, ever in flux. That's the first characteristic. The second characteristic is that because we don't understand that things are ever-changing, we grasp onto things. We cling to things because we have the expectation that they won't change. And when they do, we create our own suffering. That's dukkha. That's unsatisfactoriness. So we create our own unsatisfactoriness because we attach to impermanent things. And the third thing, that everything in existence is not self. There is no permanent being that is unchanging, that is like a soul. There's no soul. There's no, and when you try to look into your mind and your body, that you can find nothing there that you can say is self. So the Buddha says that all things, conditioned things, have these three characteristics. So when a person fully understands the Four Noble Truths and sees with insight, and seeing with insight is seeing that the three characteristics in all things, that is a person who is non-deluded. So when a non-delusion arises in a person, is it for his welfare, his happiness, his harm, for his welfare? A person who is undeluded, not overcome by delusion, his mind not obsessed by it, does not destroy life, does not encourage others to do otherwise. Will that lead to his welfare and happiness for a long time? Yes, Bhante. What do you think, Kalamas? Are these things wholesome or unwholesome? Wholesome, Bhante. Blameworthy or blameless? Blameless, Bhante. Censured or praised by the wise? Praised by the wise, Bhante. Accepted and undertaken? Do they lead to welfare and happiness or not? Or how do you take it? Accepted and undertaken, these things lead to welfare and happiness. So we take it. Thus, Kalamas, when we said, "Come, Kalamas, do not go by oral tradition, but when you know for yourselves, these things are wholesome, these things are blameless, these things are praised by the wise, these things, if accepted and undertaken, lead to welfare and happiness, then you should live in accordance with them. It is because of that this was said." So, it's so far what the Buddha is saying here is to examine your own experience, not to just trust things at a base level. And he's telling us not to even trust our own logic. Don't trust our own perceptions even. Don't trust things just because, we should trust this. Examine, question, see, is what I'm doing harmful to myself or beneficial to myself? Is it harmful to others? Is it beneficial to others? Is taking responsibility for seeing these through your experience what is skillful and what's unskillful. It's very important. The Buddha is not saying, well, just I'm enlightened and so I know best, so you do this. Right? That's amazing. You don't really find that much in this world. So that's not saying, but it's also saying, you're always another part is this censured or Is this agreed upon or disagreed upon by the wise? So it also helps to take the advice of people who you trust, but just don't just don't trust what they say just because they say it. Examine it in your own experience. That's the importance of this sutta, and it gets even better. Then Kalamas, that noble disciple who is thus devoid of longing, devoid of ill will, unconfused, clearly comprehending, ever mindful, dwells pervading one quarter with a mind imbued of loving kindness, with a mind imbued of compassion, with a mind imbued of altruistic joy. That altruistic joy, mudita is the word, is when you have joy in the success and the happiness of others. Instead of being jealous, you have joy. Okay? Whereas compassion is somebody is suffering and you have compassion and empathy for them. A mind imbued with equanimity. Likewise, the second quarter, likewise the third quarter, and the fourth quarter. Thus above, below, across, and everywhere, and to all as to himself, he dwells pervading the entire world with a mind imbued with equanimity. Well, this is cutting it short, but a mind imbued with goodwill, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. Vast, exalted, measureless, without enmity or without ill will. These are called the four divine abodes. Most often people teach metta practice, which is developing limitless goodwill for all beings. Metta is one of the four. It's good to practice developing all four of these, though. And every time the Buddha, in hundreds of times, in thousands of pages, I've read of the four main Nikayas. There are about a little bit over 4,000 pages. I've read about over 3,000 by now. So I've read a lot of the suttas. And hundreds of times the Buddha says this. This is very stock of the Buddha talking about what should be done. And so when somebody is abiding in mindfulness, you practice this. You practice the development of the four divine abodes, in addition to mindfulness practice and that kind of stuff as well. So, and the reason why you do this is this also, metta directly counteracts hatred, directly counteracts ill will. So it's an extremely important practice. Remember what I said, ill will is one of the three roots. It's one of the three things that are keeping us mired in samsara. So metta is an extremely important practice to go against that. And of course, having compassion, developing compassion, goes against having feelings of cruelty, having feelings of not caring. Right? Developing altruistic joy goes against our greed, our clinging. If we can truly have joy in other people's success, that's a very good mind state to abide in. And the fourth is equanimity. Equanimity is a mind that is not perturbed one way or the other. It's not a mind that is I like or I dislike. It's a mind that is abiding, calm and peaceful with wisdom. Sometimes we can practice metta and compassion for everybody, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be nice and compassionate back to you. Sometimes you have to be able to abide in equanimity so that you can practice for the welfare of yourself and for others. And so, yes, the noble disciple Kalamas, whose mind is in this way without enmity, without ill will, undefiled and pure, has won 4 assurances in this life. Now this is my favorite part of this sutta, because this is, until I had read this, I had never heard any other teaching, any other Dhamma talk, I had never heard anybody mention this part. This part is wonderful, in my opinion, also for Westerners who have a lot of hang-ups with regards to rebirth or re-existence. People have a lot of hang-ups. They can't get into the practice, or they don't they don't fully do their practice because they're intellectually mired in worrying about, is rebirth real? Is rebirth not real? What do I do? How this? Can I call myself a Buddhist if I don't believe in it? All this stuff. The Buddha, in these 4 assurances, watch what he says. And so he's talking about somebody who's really practiced this, totally not abiding in greed, hatred, and delusion, practicing goodwill and compassion and all these things, practicing mindfulness, seeing things clearly. This person has these 4 assurances. The first assurance he has won in this is this: if there is another world, and if there is the fruit of results of good and bad deeds. So another world would be rebirth, another existence. The fruit and result of good and bad deeds is karma or kama. So fruit is the result of you do an action, that is kama. People think that the result of what happens is your karma. They say, your karma came back to bite you. That's not actually what kama means. Kama is just action. Vipaka is fruit. So if something comes to you because of your past kama, that is the fruit. So basically, the Buddha's saying here, if there is another world, and if there is results for your actions, if there is fruit and result of good and bad deeds, it is possible that with the breakup of the body after death, I will be reborn in a good destination, in a heavenly world. So he's saying if you practice this practice, be following the Noble Eightfold Path, the path of the Buddha, you have, when you are reborn, you have a good rebirth. The second assurance he has won is this: if there is no other world, if there is no fruit of good and bad deeds, so no rebirth, nothing after this life, whatever you do has no result. Still, right here in this very life, I maintain myself in happiness, without enmity and ill will, free of trouble. So the Buddha is saying, even if there's nothing after death, the results of this practice, you can live them in this very life. Right? This is not like another religion where I'll suffer through this life and then I have my reward after. Or you're waiting for some kind of heavenly afterlife. This is Buddha saying, if you do this practice, your life will benefit from this practice right here and right now. And if there is rebirth afterwards, well then you're doubly rewarded. So the first time I saw this, I said, wow, this is awesome. Because it really emphasizes the fact that, and the Buddha says it succinctly right here, but throughout the whole canon, he talks like this. He never says, you must believe in rebirth, or else. He never says that. He never says, now he talks about what is right view, or right understanding, and that is a part of right understanding, is that there is the result of your actions, and there is further existence. And the reason why we have further existence is because of our craving. But he never forces anybody to believe this. And I also like to go along this line, it's because I am a Buddhist monk, right? So I am a representative of this tradition, and I can't say 100% that I believe in existence or re-existence. Imagine going to any other religion and a priest or somebody stands up in front of you and says, I don't know if I believe in a God, or I don't know if I believe 100% in what the tenets of this practice. What would people think? Oh my God, how could they say that? But in Buddhism, it's different. In Buddhism, it's okay. I don't have to say, I believe, if I don't believe. Now, I'm not going to go into how I feel about it. I am agnostic, and I'm very open-minded to it. And in short, I'm probably about 95% to believing that it really is true, just from my own experience and my own practice. But I can't say 100% yes, I believe, and that's okay. It doesn't affect my practice in that way. I can still practice, and it unfolds as I practice. So this is a very important thing. The second reason why I chose this sutta, because it's an extremely important thing for Western practitioners to understand. So the third assurance he has one is this: suppose evil comes to one who does evil. Then, when I have no evil intentions towards anyone, how can suffering afflict me, since I do no evil deeds? So what he's saying here, now he's talking about action and results of action, karma and vipaka, kama and vipaka. So he's saying, so if I do bad things, will come to me. Suppose evil comes to one who does evil. Then when I have no evil intentions. So he's saying, if I'm not harming anybody, if I'm doing good, then how can I be afflicted? How can suffering afflict me, since I do no evil deeds? Now, this is not saying that bad things don't happen to good people. That happens. We never know what can happen to us and what is the result of it. The Buddha never said that everything that happens to us is because of our karma. That's actually a false view. What happens to us, karma is part of that, but there's a web of conditions that occur to create things, including social, economic, genetics, environmental. All of these things play a part in our experience of what happens to us in this life. But he's saying is what he says in other places of the canon is that when you practice metta, when you follow precepts, when you do good things, you become dear to people. You become dear to humans and non-humans. And so you're a lot less likely to suffer and to have people harm you because you are this way. That's not to say that you're invincible or invulnerable and nothing bad will happen to you. But you live a life of a lot less suffering. And also, suffering actually is not something that somebody else can do to you. You actually create your own suffering. There's a sutta called the arrow or the dart, where the Buddha says that somebody who is not a practitioner of the Dhamma, when they get hit by the arrow of pain, physical body pain, they also suffer mentally. They lament, they grieve, they make mental anguish over it. And that's like being hit by a second arrow. But somebody who is an awakened being or somebody who's a practitioner, they they have the choice not to be hit by that second arrow, because that second arrow, suffering, is mental. So, and this is also, how can suffering afflict me? Even if something bad happens to me, I have the choice not to take it and make myself suffer over. So that's what the Buddha is saying. So the fourth assurance he has won is this: suppose evil does not come to one who does evil. So basically, there's no fruit of your actions. There's nothing that happens after death. You're not going to go to, you're not going to suffer any results. So it doesn't matter. Then right here I see myself purified in both respects. So he's saying, you know what? Even if evil doesn't, even if people don't experience the results of their actions, I'm still doing a good thing. I still have the benefit of living in this way. So this noble disciple, Kalamas, whose mind is in this way without enmity, without ill will, undefiled, and pure, has won these four assurances in this very life. That's pretty good, huh? It's like you can't lose by doing this practice. You absolutely can't lose. This is an amazing thing that the Buddha is talking about here. So it is, blessed one. So it is, fortunate one. This noble disciple whose mind is in this way without enmity, without ill will, undefiled and pure, has won four assurances in this very life. And then, so it's essentially just the repeating, what the Buddha has said. The first assurance has won, ... The fourth assurance he has won, suppose evil, them right here. Okay, so this noble disciple Bhante, whose mind is in this way without enmity, without ill will, undefiled and pure, has won these four assurances. Excellent Bhante, we go to the Blessed One for refuge, to the Dhamma, and to the Sangha of bhikkhus. Let the Blessed One consider us lay followers, who from today have gone forth for refuge, for life. And that is the end of the sutta. Well, any questions or comments? All quiet. What does anybody think about what he's saying here? For a practitioner in this practice, it's very important to have an open mind. It's very important to question, because this practice will lead you to question your most deeply held views and beliefs. That you even have that you're a you, that you have a permanent self, let alone everything else. Right? So if you don't have an open mind, and if you don't question, you won't get benefit from this practice. And also, this practice will actually harm you. You will leave it. You will not do it. Because some people are so attached to their views. It's very hard to let that go. Yes, I like the four assurances as well. Very, very underutilized section. I've never see any people use this. Monastics or lay teachers. And I always wondered why. I think since I found it, I have seen one other monastic talk about this, but it's just so underutilized that and especially for Westerners, I think it needs to be gone over much more. Because hope that this allows people to let go a little bit and to, not worry so much and to just practice. Because it's been my experience that all your answers, all your questions will be answered through the practice. Well, of course, because most Westerners, are raised Catholic or Christian or something. They come from this, like you have to believe this, thou shalt, do this or do that, and so it's they have a lot of aversion regarding anything that smacks of what they left. I did too. The practice actually allowed me to let go of that though. I don't have um, that aversion that I used to have regarding that. And so this is, I think, something that can be beneficial in helping people just not worry about that so much and practice. And then as they practice, that can disappear and being open-minded and questioning can lead them to benefit. At least that's what it did for me. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Well, I think because it's something that can be immediately understandable in your experience, where other things tend more towards all the stuff that he talked about, pondering of views and logic and inference and all these things. Yes. Well, I think it's time to end it out anyway. Well, I think also probably most people have not heard anything from the suttas before. They're digesting. I hope that my commentary has made it a little bit easier to digest because they can be hard, especially in the beginning. So, okay, my friend.